Welcome to CBSE English Tutorial, a visual guide.
Poetic, a peaceful village in the Thrissur district of Kerala, is known for its lush greenery, swaying coconut trees, wide paddy fields, temples, and traditional Kerala homes. The village reflects the calm rhythm of rural life, where nature, culture, and family traditions are deeply connected. Growing up in such a serene environment had a profound influence on the imagination and emotional sensitivity of the poet Kamala. The beauty of the natural surroundings, the strong family bonds typical of Kerala's matrilineal society, and the presence of storytelling and poetry in everyday life shaped her literary sensibility. Many of her later writings reflect memories of childhood, family relationships, and deep emotional introspection, experiences rooted in this cultural setting. Kamala was born on the 31st of March 1934 in Poetic, Thrissur district, Kerala. She belonged to a well-known literary family. Her father, V.M. Nair, was the managing editor of the Malayalam newspaper Mathrubhumi, while her mother, Balamani Amma, was one of Kerala's most respected Malayalam poets. Because of this rich literary environment, Kamala grew up surrounded by poetry, books, and intellectual discussions. Although she spent part of her childhood in Kolkata, her emotional connection to Kerala, especially the memories of Punayurkulam, remained strong throughout her life. Kamala wrote in both English and Malayalam. She used the name Kamala for her English works and Madhavi for her Malayalam writings. Over time, she became one of the most important voices in Indian English poetry. Her writing was bold, honest, and deeply personal. She often explored themes such as love, identity, loneliness, womanhood, and human relationships, making her a pioneer of confessional poetry in India. Some of her famous works include the poetry collections Summer in Calcutta, The Descendants, The Old Playhouse, and Other Poems, and her well-known autobiography My Story. Along with these, she also wrote numerous short stories and poems in Malayalam, as Madhavakari. The emotional depth that she developed through her childhood experiences and close family relationships is beautifully reflected in her poem, My Mother at 66. In this poem, the poet describes a simple yet powerful moment during a car journey to the airport. As she looks at her aging mother sitting beside her, she suddenly realizes the fragility of life and the inevitability of separation. Through this touching scene, the poem expresses the fear of losing a loved one, the pain of watching a parent grow old, and the deep emotional bond between a mother and daughter. Thus, the cultural environment of Punayurkulam, the influence of her literary family, and her own emotional experiences all shaped Kamala poetic voice, ultimately leading to the creation of the deeply moving poem, My Mother at 66.
There is a specific, jarring moment most people eventually face. You look across a room or over a table and realize the parent you've known your whole life has grown visibly old. The lines are suddenly deeper. Their presence feels noticeably more fragile. Indian poet Kamala mapped the exact psychology of this realization in her defining work, My Mother at 66. She places this heavy emotional reckoning inside a completely ordinary setting, a Friday morning car ride to the Cochin airport. The interior of a moving car is inescapable. It acts as a physical and psychological trap, forcing the narrator into absolute proximity with a profound grief she cannot simply walk away from. When you look at the poem on the page, it appears intimidating. It is laid out as one massive, dense block of text. Notice the start and the finish. It begins with a single capital D in the word driving, winds its way down the page, and slams into a row of periods at the very end. There are absolutely no periods or full stops anywhere within the body of the poem itself. It is entirely constructed of commas. It functions as one continuous, breathless run-on sentence. This deliberate lack of punctuation simulates the escalating momentum of a real-time panic attack. It removes the reader's ability to pause or take a breath. The narrator starts by looking over at her mother in the passenger seat. She uses 3 specific words: doze, ashen, and corpse. These adjectives aggressively strip the mother of her vitality. They paint a heavy portrait of stillness, linking her current sleeping state directly to impending death. DOS registers an immediate sharp pain. The chronological reality of 66 years becomes physically present in the small confines of the vehicle. The car interior solidifies into a claustrophobic confrontation with mortality. The vocabulary itself feels weighed down and lifeless. Overwhelmed by this observation, the narrator hits a pivot point in the text, but soon put that thought away. She turns her head and looks out the window. Outside, she describes young trees sprinting and merry children spilling. The linguistic shift is severe. The gray, static nouns describing the passenger seat are replaced by kinetic, energetic verbs rushing past the glass. The brain is scrambling for a distraction. She desperately attempts to wash away the terror of the car ride by latching on to the vibrant, chaotic life of the outside world. The ride ends at the airport security check. This creates a hard physical boundary that forces the final separation between mother and daughter. Standing a few yards away, Doss looks at her mother one last time and introduces a second visual comparison. She describes her as wan, pale as a late winter's moon. A late winter's moon carries very specific traits. It sits low in the sky, obscured by fog, drained of its luminous brightness, and marks the absolute end of a seasonal cycle. The lunar metaphor confirms that the attempt to look out the window failed. The reality of her mother's fading life force demands her attention once again. The unbroken sentence reaches its emotional climax as the narrator feels the return of that old familiar ache, my childhood's fear. This is the primal terror of abandonment. It is the earliest fear humans learn to comprehend, the sudden understanding that the people who protect us will not be here forever. The NCERT textbook itself explicitly confirms the structural intent behind this breathless momentum. Down in the editorial notes, it highlights that the entire poem indicates a single thread of thought. Without periods, there is no place to stop, reflect, or distance yourself. One terrifying realization bleeds uncontrollably into the next. Yet the poem does not conclude with an outburst. It concludes with a quiet performance. All I did was smile and smile and smile. This relentless repetition is exhausting. It is the active, desperate work of pushing the panic down and projecting comfort outward. The social contract of a farewell requires outward composure. She builds a wall of pleasantries to suppress the internal collapse happening in her mind. The form and the final line work together perfectly. They show us how our most breathless, chaotic terrors are routinely concealed behind our brightest, most repetitive smiles.
In the poem My Mother at 66, Kamala Das beautifully uses several poetic devices to express her deep emotions about her mother's aging and the fear of losing her. Let us explore some of the important literary devices used in the poem. First, we notice the use of simile. A simile compares two things using the words like or as. The poet describes her mother's face as ashen, like that of a corpse. This comparison highlights how pale, weak, and lifeless her mother appears while sleeping in the car. Another striking simile appears in the line, "Wan, pale as a late winter's moon." Here, the poet compares her mother's face to a winter moon. Just like the pale moon of late winter that lacks brightness and warmth, the mother's face reflects fading vitality and approaching old age. Next, we see the use of metaphor, where a comparison is made without using like or as. The phrase, "the merry children spilling out of their homes," metaphorically represents youth, vitality, and joy. These lively children symbolize the energy of life, which sharply contrasts with the poet's aging mother sitting silently beside her. The poem also contains personification, where non-human objects are given human qualities. For example, the poet writes about trees sprinting. Of course, trees cannot actually run, but describing them this way emphasizes the speed of the moving car and the swift passage of time. Another powerful device used in the poem is repetition. At the end of the poem, the poet writes, "Smile and smile and smile." The repetition of the word smile shows the poet's effort to hide her inner fear and sadness. She smiles repeatedly to reassure her mother and to suppress her own anxiety about separation and aging. The poem is also rich in imagery, which helps readers visualize the scene vividly. Expressions such as trees sprinting, children spilling, and the wan, pale face create clear visual pictures in our minds. These images contrast the lively world outside the car with the quiet reality of the aging mother inside. Another important technique is contrast. Outside the car, there is movement and life, trees rushing past and children joyfully playing. Inside the car, however, the poet sees the stillness and frailty of her mother. This contrast between youth and old age deepens the emotional impact of the poem. The poem also makes use of enjambment. Many lines continue into the next without a pause or full stop. In fact, the poem almost reads like one continuous sentence. This flowing structure reflects the poet's uninterrupted stream of thoughts and emotions. Finally, we notice alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of nearby words. Examples include phrases like fear, familiar, and the repeated smiling, smiling, smiling. These sound patterns add musical quality to the poem and subtly emphasize the poet's emotional state. Through these literary devices, simile, metaphor, personification, repetition, imagery, contrast, enjambment, and alliteration, Kamala expresses a universal human emotion, the quiet fear of losing a loved one to time and aging.
Thank you for watching. See you again in a bit.